It is Friday, January 19th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Part 2 Remastered episode of LTPS. Let's begin, as always, with our PlayStation Plus reminder. The January PS Plus Essential lineup is still live on PSN, so make sure you claim those games before they go away. Also, the January Extra and Premium lineup is also live on PSN now, so you can go download and check those games out. But we also have 10 games leaving PS Plus Extra. That would be Tacoma, RE7 Biohazard, Tekken 7, Ace Combat 7, so a lot of 7s are going to be expiring soon. I Am Setsuna, really fun game there. That one is so good. Also, Thomas Was Alone. That is an absolute classic. Kind of weird to be calling it classic. That game is still really new in my head, but it is quite old now at this point. Hue is also really interesting, so a lot of good stuff that's going to be leaving soon, which means from this point on, you've got about 30 days left to play these games. Speaking of PS Plus, we can also segue nicely into our first story, which is about Foamstars. Square recently confirmed a release date for this game on February 6th, and that also lines up with the debut of PS Plus Essential February, the February games, and this game is going to be on there. So it is going to launch day one into PS Plus, after which it will be priced separately for $29.99 in March. So if you do have a PS Plus membership, then that's something you can download and play right away, which is good for this game considering it is a multiplayer title. You want that barrier of entry to be as low as possible on day one, and it's always a welcome surprise, especially given that for this game, I feel like, many people, myself included, were like, oh, what is this game? It looks so goofy. It looks like a, sort of Splatoon ripoff, I guess we could say, to be overly harsh, but it is something where from the open beta and previews, it's actually a lot more fun than people thought it would be. So, it's always nice to have these day one titles, and occasionally we're seeing them. And so Foamstars is going to be one going into next month on the PS Plus Essential lineup. But in other Foamstars news, and we actually do have more than one story here about Foamstars, if you can believe that, but going back to the start of this year, if you remember, Square's president put out that open letter about how they're going to be aggressively pursuing AI, and that's very much going to be a theme as we keep, covering the game's business, but it did not take very long, so we already found out they're using AI in this game. So what happened recently was at a press event speaking with VGC, the Foamstars producer, Kosuke Okatani, they confirmed some AI was used to generate in-game icons, that being the AI generator Midjourney. They said, and I quote here, "All the core elements in Foamstars, the core gameplay, and the things that make the game enjoyable, those are all made by hand. However, we did want to experiment with AI as well. In terms of the content in the game, this makes up about 0.01% or even less, but we have dabbled in it by creating these icons in the game." So that did not take very long to show up after the open letter, though obviously this would have been going on prior to the open letter, but still something where not many companies are as forthcoming about using AI like Square, so at least in that case we have a better idea of exactly what they intend on doing. Some could argue it's very negligible to see 0.01%, right? So what's the harm that's being done there? It's not like they're replacing human jobs just yet, but that's the key way to phrase it, is that just yet. Possibly they will be doing this down the road. But at least in this case, with them using Midjourney, between Midjourney and a few other companies like Stability AI, and there was one other one, and DeviantArt, I think it was, but a lot of these companies were recently, sued back in early 2023. So this was kind of recent, where a bunch of visual artists filed a lawsuit against these companies for the very reason of, possible copyright infringement and lack of consent for their work being scrapped online and then being used to train those generators. And so if you type in an artist's name, sometimes you'll get a returned image that has a very similar art style that can sometimes be indistinguishable from their own original art. And so it's very problematic. But at the same time, we're still in a situation of there's very little regulation and there's no precedent being set. So like the update with that lawsuit from early 2023, this was back in November now, it would have been, where the judge in Northern California had threw out a lot of their, they dismissed a lot of their claims because it's so tough to sort of, argue that there's copyright infringement happening, because whether it's human or not, all work can be argued as derivative, right? As in, if I look at something and I'm able to sort of reproduce the same art style, as long as it's not a one-for-one copy or something, even in that case where I make something very similar, it's like, if that were to go all the way through court, it's very tough for the original artist to, make that claim that it's infringement, right? So it's the same thing with AI, even if people don't like to hear that, right? So they were given the artists were given a chance to amend their claims, and I think that's where that lawsuit stands right now, is that they're adding more defendants, making new claims, and so it's something I'm following closely, because we have to, really see what rules and what is considered right and wrong during this uncertain path that we're going down, right? And when it comes to video game development, where there is a place for it to be used, I think it would be naive to suggest otherwise, that we can't make AI some sort of ethical extension of human work, where games are very expensive to make, right? That's a problem for a lot of publishers, big and small. So it's not like there's a way that this can work. But when we're talking about publicly traded companies that are looking to reduce their costs, and labor is a massive one, I have very little optimism that this is going to go down the correct path, right? So for now, we'll keep watching this closely and see where it goes. But for now, that's what happened with Foamstars and its AI use in the game. Now, in other Square Enix news, we can also mention Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where we just got a new trailer, and a little surprising that they did not save this for what we assume is a state of play in either late January, so very soon, or early February, but it was a minute long, and my god, there are very few times where I think a trailer is like that good, or at least one that gets me that excited about a game coming up. Nowadays, I don't really get like that, but there's something about this trailer that Square put out, and, skip ahead if you don't want to see these big key moments, but, like, I feel like it captures the same essence and excitement and sort of larger-than-life feeling you got from Final Fantasy VII back then when it came out on PS1 after leaving Midgard. So, I don't know, it's just that this one trailer was dressed up really, really well. The presentation for it was incredible. I really loved how they did this. It just, I don't know, maybe it was the music that really sold me on it, because I listened to the OST for, the original FF7, like, maybe once a month if I'm being honest, but yeah, that was a really good trailer. Also, we can mention that Square put out a very small clip of the fast travel in the game, so we could see a little bit of the world map and see that. Much like FF16, it takes maybe 4 or 5 seconds on the long end for fast traveling, so I almost feel like we're getting a bit desensitized to fast travel on PlayStation 5. It's almost, it should be an expectation at this point, so it's like if it's longer than 5 seconds, then that is considered long nowadays. So good to see that this game will very much have proper fast travel like most other PlayStation 5 games that we've seen thus far. Moving on to The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, which comes out today. So if you're playing it today, hope you have a great time and enjoy it. But we do have a story here about the director of Part 1 and also Part 2 Remastered, Matthew Gallant, speaking with Jordan Midler of VGC, where they went over a number of things about this upcoming entry, talking about the no return mode, the introduction of the lost levels, Matthew's experience directing these games, but he was also asked about the pushback remasters sometimes have from fans. And so Matthew responded with this interesting quote where he says, "I don't understand some of the consternation about what The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered offers. It's the best way to play The Last of Us Part 2. If you're a new PlayStation owner and new to the franchise, we want you to get the best experience with all the hardware features on a PS5 native version of the game. My sense is there's an audience for this for whom the idea of a PS5 version is thrilling. I'm also speaking for myself. I'm excited we can bring this to the fans, and if it's not for everyone, that's fine." Now, normally I would tend to agree, because ports, remasters, and even remakes sometimes depends on how much they're actually doing with a remake, but these things are not nearly as resource intensive as people think they are, to the point where they're impeding on any sort of, sequel that people want from a studio or a new IP. It's just not usually like that. There's almost always a team that's still working on a flagship product, at most very established studios with a big publisher backing that studio. And oftentimes with ports and remasters, they can either outsource a lot of work, it's a small team, or sometimes they just give it to a different studio, which means it's obviously not impeding on anything. So with that said, it's more a matter of, I guess, Matthew, not really acknowledging the elephant in the room here, which is anything surrounding Naughty Dog or their games or Neil Druckmann or Part 2, right? People just don't like Part 2 story or Neil Druckmann or the direction of the studio, oftentimes to a very unrealistic world where people just get really weird about that stuff. And I mean, that's one thing, but you know, people are allowed to dislike stuff, but it does tend to, with Naughty Dog nowadays, get into that landscape of that's why there's just so much pushback for, you know, this game or anything Naughty Dog does do. That's like the unfortunate reality that we really live in, because other studios can do remasters and ports and they don't see nearly as much pushback. But I will say it's still something where I can understand the frustration of the output in general, which is we're seeing far less games. And so if we do talk about Naughty Dog, we're going from the PlayStation 3 generation where we had 3 Uncharted's, a new IP with Last of Us, all on a 2-year timeline between every single game, and that was all during one cycle. And then PS4, we only had Last of Us Part 2, Uncharted 4, The Lost Legacy, and now we're going into PlayStation 5 where it's like, are we really only going to get one brand new single player game, and then by the time they start the next one, we're already looking at PlayStation 6, because now there's also no factions. So, I mean, I get that disappointment, but in fairness, that's where most studios do not have that kind of output nowadays. It's just, we're well beyond that, right? So, in that way, I understand and sympathize, and I'm of the same mind where it sucks that we don't have that anymore, but that's just the business that we're in nowadays. But as far as what Matthew's talking about on a surface level with remasters in general, yes, I don't really understand it either. They don't impede the way people think they do. They bring these games up to a modern audience. It's not like a native PS5 version is going to be a bad thing to play. So yeah, as far as that goes, he's right on the money. Next up, Helldivers 2. Arrowhead Game Studios has confirmed that the game has gone gold ahead of its planned February 8th release, and that is good to see. That means the game is right on time. We're only 3 weeks away from another new PlayStation Studios game for 2024. Really the first new one if we're not counting Part 2. But this represents a very interesting time, because this means, you know, it's been a while since we've had a game like this where it's a standalone multiplayer premium release. That and it's, you know, co-op, PvE, third person, launching on PS5 and PC day one, cross-play enabled. It's also interesting for Arrowhead because, you know, this is a very different kind of Helldivers where they're going from top down to a much larger budget third person shooter. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the community enjoys this very new take on the Helldivers franchise. And I'm also really curious as to the embargo. So the press should be getting the game very soon if they don't already have it. And I'm just wondering how Sony is going to handle this in terms of the, because they might want to make it something where the embargo is day of, so as in, you know, you don't talk about it until the game comes out, and that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that may indicate that the publisher is you know, expecting bad reviews based on whatever mock reviews they did in-house or whatever. Maybe they're not confident about the quality of the game, and so, you know, that could be a possibility, but it might be more a matter of they want day one to be reflective of a lot of players jumping into the game and what is the real experience as you're going through it that way, which that's really the proper way to review the game anyway. And so I'm sure a lot of outlets are probably, you know, going to try and approach it that way, or at least that's the way that it should be done. So it might not have the embargo lift early like we see with other single player games where like Spider-Man or, you know, Ragnarok, it was like way early. So, but it could be something where that is the case if the press wants to just play by themselves, considering it's a more intimate experience anyway with only, you know, 2 to 4 players. But still, I just, there's many angles of this game where I'm curious as to how it's going to be received. Like I myself, I'm not like super excited for it, but I mean, I gravitate towards some of these third-person shooters and the sort of sci-fi aspect of it. I mean, I can kind of get down with what they're putting out there, so I'll certainly give it a try, but yeah, we'll be watching this closely and see how this game is received by the time it comes out. Moving on to some PS5 console sales data, this time in Japan, where Famitsu put out a new report for console sales data in Japan throughout 2023, well, software and hardware sales. We learned that PS5 sold 2.6 million units in Japan throughout the entire year, which is more than double from last year. And because we have a number that we can sort of, benchmark this to prior years, we're actually finding out that this represents a historic increase in hardware sales for PlayStation, where this is the most hardware they've sold in Japan in a year since 2004 during the PS2 days, which is absolutely nuts to consider when we look at Japan historically, right? Consoles have been on the decline, home consoles, I should say. So throughout PS3 and PS4, there was enough pent-up demand to where PS5 actually did reasonably well in Japan, in its home country, and the territory where everyone's been, suggesting that the console sales have been terrible, or there's no demand over there, or it's not just a supply issue thing, but it's always been a supply issue thing because they were not sending enough consoles there. Obviously, that was the problem for a long time. But we can say that software sales have still been not great over there in terms of how many PS5 games they're selling, which can sometimes be an indicator of, if those consoles are actually being used and played in Japan, because the top 10, top 20 games, it's almost always dominated by Nintendo first party, which is not entirely surprising. But I feel like there's still always going to be a portion of consoles that, nowadays we can't ignore that a lot of them are still being bought and then shipped overseas to China. And for as long as China is going to have, specific consoles with, certain software locks on it where it's more desirable to get an international console, and shipping from Japan is going to be the most lucrative option there, I feel like there's always going to be a portion of console sales in Japan that, in a way, we can kind of write off as, oh, well, they're being scalped. Right? I'm not sure how much of an issue that really is, or how many console sales that's being represented in the final number. I don't think anybody can really figure that out, but demand is demand, so whether it's Japanese customers or Chinese customers, I guess to Sony it's not going to be a massive problem. Now, moving on to a very big news story from this past week, where it's about Ubisoft, subscriptions, and also you getting comfortable not owning your games. That's right. Now, I'm sure a lot of you probably already saw this, where it was a big story. A lot of places were reporting on this, a lot of big headlines being thrown out there. And before even diving in, we all know where I fall on this topic of, which one do I prefer? Which one do I advocate for? It's physical media. But in this case, I do find that this story kind of leaned a little bit too much into the, trying to sell a headline at the expense of what was really said, or the tone being lost. And so despite, the preference here, in complete fairness, we have to really discuss what was said here. So what did happen was, over on GamesIndustry.biz, speaking with Christopher Dring, it was Ubisoft's director of subscriptions, Philippe Tremblay, where he made a statement that really caused a bit of controversy surrounding subscriptions. So a lot of the conversation is just about the subscription business in general, how Ubisoft is approaching and rebranding their Ubisoft Plus premium service, which is going to have major day-and-date releases, things like that. But when discussing consumer behaviors, that's when Philippe gave the quote that you probably already saw. But we'll try and give a little bit more context here, and we'll go in order of the quotes and what was actually said. So he says, and I quote, "The point is to not force users to go down one route or another. We offer purchase, we offer subscription, and it's the gamer's preference that is important here. We are seeing some people who choose to buy choosing to subscribe now, but it all works." One of the things we saw is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. They got comfortable not owning their CD collection or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. As gamers grow comfortable in that aspect, you don't lose your progress. If you resume a game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game, so it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game. I still have 2 boxes of DVDs. I definitely understand the gamer's perspective with that, but as people embrace that model, they will see that these games will exist, the service will continue, and you'll be able to access them when you feel like. That's reassuring. Now, just to provide more context on, I guess, what they were really discussing, it wasn't about how do we make subscription number one, how do we make it the dominant way to play games, and how do we eliminate a la carte purchases. It wasn't about that. It was the most normal answer somebody could give for somebody that's a director of subscription and they're being asked, what about consumer behaviors? How is, subscriptions going to really take off in this business? Like, is that not the answer? So I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, I still disagree with parts of what he said, right? Like how it's reassuring that the games will always be there. I don't think that's true. I don't feel comfortable with that kind of leverage being in the hands of the IP holder where, they can control a curated catalog and at any moment pull those games away or, for whatever kind of licensing a particular game may have within it, right? Which may be out of their control. It could be, music licensing or any sort of B-roll that they used for IRL footage. I mean, there's cases where games get delisted, right? So, I mean, I will always disagree with certain aspects of that portion of the conversation, but I really felt like this was maybe being a little bit misconstrued in a direction that is not really exactly what was being supported here or really in a lot of other places. We have to remember that with games, there's just not really enough there to even show that subscription will eventually become some sort of dominant be-all, end-all way to buy and play games, right? Obviously, the upside is there for the publishers, right? If subscription ever does take off, they've got the control of the catalog. They have a recurring monthly fee that they're extracting out of users. But it's still not really working for a lot of publishers. I mean, Ubisoft is obviously trying it out now with day-and-date releases on Ubisoft Plus Premium. But, Sony is a big publisher. They still do not believe in launching their games day one into subscription. It financially, it does not work there. Take-Two is another one. Obviously, Microsoft is on the other spectrum where they are pushing it and trying to go forward, but the numbers are not really showing us that is what's going to happen anyway, right? We've got saturation for all these sub-services. Matt Piscatella of Circana actually put out a really good tweet about this, how subscription growth has been flattening, which it has, right? That's the other angle of this. And it only accounts for like 10% of video game spend right now in this business. Obviously, it could change. That could be a larger slice of the pie. And I mean, if we're being honest, physical games, yeah, that's going to be a bit of an issue going into, say, the next generation. And that's where the consumer has the most leverage if a studio ships a competent build on the disc. But in terms of a la carte buying, I just don't think we're going to see this go away anytime soon, because even today you can still a la carte buy songs and movies and things like that. Of course, they're digital, and that's a separate thing to discuss, but I don't know. It was just something where, like, these publishers are always going to go where the money is. Many publishers still feel that the money is in selling games separately, premium standalone releases. Like, that is still the primary model. You've also got game studios like Larian, the founder there mentioned, sent out a thread on Twitter too, going over this topic and sharing their, sort of, I guess, their take on the topic, right? And they flat out said, you're not going to find our games on subscription unless somebody comes knocking and they're going to offer them something they can't say no to. But I just think right now we're very far away from that being something where it's the majority way to buy and access video games. And the power does still fall in the hands of the consumer. So we may very well see Ubisoft come to the same conclusion if Ubisoft Plus Premium ends up saturating and not going anywhere meaningful. Now, in a somewhat related news story for physical video games, not great news here, but over in the UK, the well-known video game retailer Game confirmed to Eurogamer that they're no longer going to be accepting used video game trade-ins as of February 16th. They'll still keep selling their existing stock of used video games, but once they're gone, and they'll no longer accept trade-ins moving forward. So the reason given here, because at first I saw this and I was like, why? Because buying and selling physical games at retail, it tends to have that like bad association of, oh, they lowball you, they give you absolutely nothing, then they sell it for nearly MSRP again. But it's like, well, yeah, that's so, like, why would they want to stop that program? But the reason given here is that because in the UK, a lot of these game locations are either going into or they're already located in existing Sports Direct stores, the cataloging system required to manage all that stock, that requires a separate point of sale system. So they're trying to streamline this by just using the existing system in those stores. So instead of somehow merging the two systems, they're just retiring, having to deal with cataloging and storing and selling used video games. So that's the reason. Which, I mean, okay, I guess that makes sense if the cost to merge those systems is not nearly worth the amount of stock that they're getting in on a daily basis, because, yeah, physical video games does not see the same kind of, volume as it did 10 years ago. So that I understand, but it was still, like, a little bit weird to me. I'm like, well, yeah, but, like, it's just... For a store, it really is that lucrative when a $20 game comes in and you offer somebody $2, right? So, and here, the thing is, I still will advocate for that as well, right? Even if it's like a very bad deal, that is the beauty of physical video games, baby. You gotta love it. If somebody does not want to go through the hassle of finding a buyer to get the full value of what they own, having to ship it and list it on eBay and deal with, those issues that sometimes come up, if you don't want to do that, you can still take it to a retailer and they'll give you something for it and you'll still come out ahead versus buying the game on the eShop, PSN, Xbox Store. I mean, still, that's the beauty. It's a leverage. You have the control of what you want to do with it. So this is still, I consider, not great news, even though it's my understanding that in the UK, people, much like in the US with GameStop, nobody really likes game stores or they don't like going to them, or so... I don't know. There's not much I can really add there other than, it's another blow to physical video games. No doubt about that. Next up, we have another PlayStation IP being adapted into a movie by PlayStation Productions, and this time also in collaboration with Screen Gems. It's Until Dawn, the 2015 PlayStation 4 Choose Your Own Path horror exclusive, which this is the most... obvious, straightforward, yes, that can be a movie. That makes complete and total sense. And so, yeah, that's another IP that Sony owns. It was made by Supermassive at the time, but yeah, Sony does own it, so that's an IP they can sell off and get it done, turned into a movie. The only thing I'm wondering is what is going to be canon, because Until Dawn, the beauty of that game is that there are many different outcomes with those characters and the choices you can make. And so I'm wondering if they're just going to take a particular path and make that the sort of canon movie path, or if they'll maybe be a little bit unconventional and, I don't know, maybe sort of make a commentary on how it can go in many different directions, and maybe they just do a weird thing with a story where it's breaking the fourth wall or whatever the case is. I think that would kind of really, undersell the entire point of Until Dawn, but either way, it's being directed by David F. Sandberg. The script is being done by Blair Butler, and that's being looked over by Gary Dauberman, who has done It, Annabelle, and The Nun. So, yeah, I mean, for sure, I'm in. I'll watch that. And yeah, I want to know exactly how they're going to sort of do the story and what's going to be decided. But that, and also the actors as well, considering many of them very much could reprise their roles. That would be cool, although I doubt that would happen. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you would like to win a code for Immortality on PlayStation 5 coming out very soon, then we have 3 codes to give away, courtesy of the publisher, Half Mermaid Productions. So if you would like to win, just follow the link down below. Just do some standard entries, and we'll announce the winners. I'll contact the winners when the game comes out so you can play it day of, but we'll also announce them next week as well, just so you know if you won or not, so that way you can check spam emails or whatever the case is, in case you miss being contacted. But otherwise, 3 codes for Immortality on PlayStation 5. Go ahead and enter. We're trying to give away some games here. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was a conversation about the PlayStation 5 2024 PS Studios lineup, which thus far is looking barren past Q1 of this year. And so we do our standard portfolio review of all Sony's internal studios, and also go over some aspects of that conversation that are really being a bit overlooked in terms of how Sony fills out their portfolio nowadays. So if you have not seen that conversation, go check it out. But otherwise, that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.